Hi, and welcome to Viewmaster Travels. I'm Dave, and it's my goal to visit all the locations from my vintage Viewmaster collection. Today it's Reel 136, Washington, D.C. Did you know that much of D.C. was inspired by Rome, or that the Library of Congress emerged from the ashes of a devastating fire thanks to Thomas Jefferson's remarkable collection of books? Plus, the story of a British scientist's fortune in gold that led to the founding of the world's largest museum institution. Our first Viewmaster target was well across town, so we hopped on the Red Line Metro. This stretch of the Red Line is the oldest in D.C., opening in 1976 from Farragut North to Rhode Island Avenue, but we stopped at Union Station. Union Station opened in 1907, replacing two 19th century stations, the New Jersey Avenue Station, where Lincoln had arrived in D.C. in disguise to begin his presidency, and the Baltimore and Potomac Station, where President Garfield was assassinated. In fact, the site of Garfield's assassination was entirely lost when that station was demolished until 1937. During the construction of the National Gallery of Art, workers unearthed a sealed metal box marked with a gold star. This is thought to be the original marker of the assassination site from the train station. Today, there's a commemorative plaque there. Gotta admit, arriving at Union Station was an impressive experience. The architecture is very grand, and like we'll see in a few places in DC, it's based on Roman ideas. The Founding Fathers looked to Rome frequently for inspiration in forming their own republic, which would be the largest new republic formed since Rome had fallen into imperialism. For example, these grand entrance arches are copies of the Arch of Constantine in Rome, and these internal vaulted spaces are inspired by the baths of Diocletian. There's a couple more Roman connections. The creek running under Union Station used to be named the Tiber after the river running through Rome, and before DC was even built, this plantation area was actually named Rome. It's as if the echoes of ancient Rome were woven into the fabric of the city long before its foundation. And like Rome, DC has been shaped by fire. Several devastating blazes left their mark on its history, as we'll see after our first Viewmaster destination. East Front is Capitol's principal entrance. From Union Station, it's a quick walk south to the Capitol, and it's a very imposing building. The Congress House was the first thing planned for the new federal district of Washington, and even though the building wasn't finished, the government started using it in 1800. The original design was even more Roman than what we see today. The original dome was smaller, based on the one in the Pantheon, and the columns, pediments, and long central staircase are based on Roman temple designs. But the Roman influence doesn't end there. These pediment sculptures, named Progress of Civilization, show a downtrodden Native American, and it's based on a Roman bronze sestertius coin showing a defeated native, which represented Rome's dominance over the savages, and is mirrored in the U.S. Capitol, reflecting the narrative of dominance the U.S. used to justify its expansion. However, one Roman inspiration affected the very core of the American language. Did you ever wonder why this building is spelled Capitol? When Pierre L'Enfant designed the city, he put the Congress House on the highest point, Jenkins Hill, and made it the center of the city. Thomas Jefferson thought the seat of American government needed a better name and called it the Capitol, named after the Capitoline Hill in Rome, which was the most important of the 7 hills of Rome, housed the Roman Senate, and was the seat of Roman government. Over time, Jefferson's Roman reference became the word used in American English to refer to all state legislature buildings, although capital C Capitol is used only for the one in Washington, D.C. The British tried to burn the Capitol down in 1814, along with the rest of the city. At a time when the founding of the country and the city were still living memory for many, this must have seemed like the end of the Republic. Yet from the ashes, institutions like our next destination would rise. Library of Congress. The Library of Congress building is across the grass from the Capitol, and it's now called the Thomas Jefferson Building. Way back before DC existed, the US government met in Philadelphia or New York, where they had easy access to large libraries. But this would be a problem with their new home in the swamp, so they spent $5,000 and purchased 740 books and 3 maps, creating the first Library of Congress. It was stored in the north wing of the new Capitol building, and it was only available to members of Congress, the president, and vice president. Tragically, in 1814, during the War of 1812, the British Army used the library for a different reason, as kindling to burn down the Capitol. Everything was destroyed except for one book, taken as a souvenir by British Admiral George Cockburn, an account of the receipts and expenditures of the United States for the year 1810, which was returned in 1940. I wonder what the late fees were. Luckily, ex-President Thomas Jefferson immediately offered to sell his own personal library to Congress. He had 6,487 books that took him over 50 years to collect. He even let Congress name their own price to buy the books, and they priced them by size. $10 for a folio, where the printed paper is only folded once, $6 for a quarto, $3 for an octavo, and $1 for a duodecimo. There was a lot of debate about buying the collection at all, since it wasn't just focused on law or governance, but Jefferson convinced Congress that there is, in fact, no subject to which a member of Congress may not have occasion to refer, which became the guiding principle of the Library of Congress from that day forward. Jefferson ended up with $23,950 for his collection, significantly less than it was actually worth. Unfortunately, much of the collection was lost to another fire in 1851, caused by a faulty chimney. If I were a book there, I'd be scared. Despite this, the Library of Congress grew rapidly throughout the 19th century, and eventually they decided to build a separate building to hold everything. The Library of Congress building was completed in 1894, and this is the building you see in the Viewmaster picture, which looks pretty much unchanged between then and now. Inside, though, it's unimaginably beautiful. It really took my breath away. It took 7 years to build and involved 40 painters and sculptors. There are many statues, mosaics, and paintings, and it includes the famous circular reading room which we got to wander around, and has a couple secrets which I'll get to in a moment. Plus, it's fireproof. The Declaration of Independence and Constitution. Okay, so here's where I learned something. I didn't realize that the Declaration of Independence wasn't in the Library of Congress anymore, so we went looking for it there but couldn't find it. It was moved to the National Archives in 1952. That's what I get for basing my travels on 75-year-old 3D photographs and not Nicolas Cage movies. But did you know that the document on display isn't the one signed on the 4th of July, 1776? After some number of rough drafts were reviewed and approved by committee, Thomas Jefferson wrote what he called a fair copy, incorporating everyone's suggestions. This handwritten final draft was approved on July 4th, and probably signed by someone, but nobody knows for sure. It's this handwritten fair copy that went to the printer John Dunlap, who made around 200 large-format broadside copies of it for distribution. What's in the National Archives was prepared later by Timothy Matlack, a scribe who was asked to handwrite carefully on parchment the same declaration for everyone to sign. He took 2 weeks to carefully lay out his work, leaving plenty of room at the bottom for signatures, and it took 6 months for everyone to sign it. This engrossed version traveled with Congress throughout the Revolutionary War and between each temporary capital city, ending up with the Department of State in D.C., barely escaping when the British burned down the State Department building in 1814. It was on display in the Patent Office and State Department Library for most of the 19th century, moving to the new Jefferson Building at the Library of Congress in 1921, until it was moved to the National Archives. While in the protection of the library, someone left a giant handprint on it, but no one knows who. And here's the secret about the reading room. The big circular structure in the middle was where you would request a book via pneumatic tube. You'd put your request in the right tube, it'd shoot down into the basement and then to the correct stack where someone would find your book and put it onto the mechanical book conveyor, which would bring it back up to you. Amazingly, this system extended all the way back to the Capitol building via underground tunnel. Someone in Congress could put a request into the pneumatic tube and it'd go all the way across to the library, and the book would be put on the conveyor and go all the way back. This was built because the library was originally intended for Congress's use, and they didn't want to have to walk back and forth across the grass. Thomas Jefferson's personal library, which he sold to Congress and then caught fire, has been on display since 2008. 2,000 original books survived the fire, and about 2/3 of what burned was replaced. But the library is actively hunting down a list of 897 rare books to rebuild the collection, so if you have any of those, let them know. Smithsonian Building faces north across the mall. To many people, the Smithsonian museums are the entire reason to visit Washington, D.C. The building shown in the Viewmaster picture is here, right in the middle of the National Mall. This is the original Smithsonian Institute, which all began with a man named James Lewis Macy. James's parents were Elizabeth Macy and Hugh Percy, the British Duke of Northumberland, but they weren't married, so James had no right to his father's estate or title. He was upset by this, saying, "The best blood of England flows in my veins. On my father's side I am a Northumberland, on my mother's I'm related to kings, but this avails me not. My name shall live in the memory of man when the titles of the Northumberlands and the Percys are extinct and forgotten." James focused his life on scientific endeavors and did very well, eventually changing his last name to Smithson, his father's birth name. Under that name, he published 27 papers with the Royal Society of London, described a new mineral later named Smithsonite, and invented a better way of making coffee. But his family fortune was only available to him in trust intended for his nephew, the legitimate heir of Northumberland. So Smithson's will left the fortune to his nephew like was required, but he added a clause that if his nephew were to die with no heirs, that he'd bequeath the whole of my property to the United States of America to found at Washington, under the name of the Smithsonian Institution, an establishment for the increase and diffusion of knowledge among men. He'd never been to America and barely knew of Washington, but said that in this new country there would always be free thought and indefinite progress. Smithson died in 1829, and his nephew did die with no heirs. So, in 1835, Congress was informed that a scientist from England had left a vast fortune, amounting to almost 2% of the entire federal budget for the year, to a country he'd never seen. In fact, Aaron Vail, the American diplomat in London who conveyed the news, actually wrote that the will is in language which might induce a belief that the testator labored under some degree of mental aberration at the time it was made. Despite this, and despite some protest that the US government wasn't in the business of accepting British fortunes just to make people famous, Congress sent politician Richard Rush over to England to get the money. Rush started a case in the British Chancery Courts, the first one ever opened on behalf of another country, and pushed it through with amazing speed. Cases were taking 20 to 40 years to complete at the time, but Rush got the money in just 2. He now had 104,960 gold sovereigns, plus 8 shillings and 6 pence, as well as the rest of Smithson's belongings, which he packed into 11 crates, addressed them to the United States, and put them on the sailing ship Mediator bound for New York. The British sovereigns weren't legal tender in the US, so Rush melted them down at the Treasury and had them mint Golden Eagle coins. The last time they'd had enough money to bother doing this was 1804. In fact, if you ever find an 1838 $10 Golden Eagle, it's almost certainly Smithson gold. Congress took the gold and purchased 500 government bonds from the 2-year-old state of Arkansas, who soon spent the money and never paid it back. John Adams convinced Congress that at least the money was in the U.S. economy now and that they should still fund a Smithsonian Institution, and they agreed, but it took another 8 years to decide exactly what that should be. In 1855, Congress built the Castle, the first building on the National Mall. And you can tell from the guidebooks at the time that the purpose of the castle wasn't well defined. It had lecture halls, research facilities, an art museum, collections from expeditions, libraries, Smithson's personal stuff, and living quarters for visiting scientists. And in 1865, the building caught fire, caused again by a faulty chimney. The fire destroyed most of the building, the artifacts, and all of Smithson's scientific papers. The devastation was unimaginable. The Civil War was still raging, troops were stationed right outside the building, and again the future of the Institute, if not the entire Republic, must have seemed frighteningly uncertain. Lindbergh's Spirit of St. Louis, 1927. One of the most iconic objects at the Smithsonian, the Spirit of St. Louis, was donated to the museum in 1927, just a year after its famous transatlantic flight. However, it's clearly not in the same building today as it was when the Viewmaster picture was taken. The Viewmaster picture has some clues. Look at these tall arches, the industrial roof with a skylight, and these rows of wooden display cases. Where was this? The tragic fire of 1865 caused Congress to rethink the purpose of the Smithsonian. They realized it was evolving from an institute of research to a museum of record. The nation's global explorations and scientific advancements resulted in hundreds of thousands of curiosities that needed a home. Suddenly, the Smithsonian wasn't just a place of study, it was becoming the vault of America's greatest discoveries, America's attic, where the wonders of the world would be preserved for future generations. Meanwhile, the nation's 100th birthday was coming up, and Congress decided to hold an international exhibition in Philadelphia. This would be a great opportunity to display these artifacts to the world, and ticket sales from the exhibition could help fund a new building for the Smithsonian. When the exhibition ended, 33 of the 40 nations who had exhibits there donated them to the U.S. government, expecting them to be on permanent display in Washington. All this was stored in the D.C. Armory building since the Smithsonian had nowhere to put it all. But the exhibition ticket sales had been very good, raising enough money to fund a new building, and in 1881, the Smithsonian opened the U.S. National Museum right next to the castle and moved all the Centennial Exhibition stuff into it. Crazily, it was the cheapest permanent building ever erected by the U.S. government, and it was fireproof. By the end of that decade, their collection had gone from 192,000 objects to 2.8 million. And it was here that Lindbergh brought the Spirit of St. Louis to hang from the ceiling. This building was also the original home of the Star-Spangled Banner, the Wright Flyer, the first telephone, first record player, Apollo 11, and the first moon rock. The artifacts in this building became the seeds of the collections in the Smithsonian's later expansions, including the Natural History, American History, and Air and Space Museums. And similar to the Library of Congress, the Smithsonian Castle is connected to the neighboring museums by secret tunnels. One to the Old National Museum, now named the Arts and Industries Building, and one across to the Natural History Museum. Today, James Smithson's legacy amounts to 21 museums, 21 libraries, and 1 zoo. His $500,000 donation has turned into an institution with $1 billion annual budget, protecting 157 million curious objects. Twice as many people visit the Smithsonian museums in a year than any other museum in the world. The Library of Congress is now the largest library in the world, filling 3 tunnel-connected buildings with 175 million items. They receive 15,000 new items every day, and their digitized online database serves as the main source of information I use for this channel. From the ashes of fires that threatened to destroy a fledgling country, we've seen the incredible rebirth of world-leading institutions like the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian. Each of these places contains both the weight of history and hope for the future. And if you ever visit Washington, D.C., hopefully you can explore these remarkable places. Well, that's it for this episode. Thanks for watching.